Good evening, everyone. My name is Dawn. Thank you for joining this webinar brought to you by ASQ Innovation Division. The topic of tonight's webinar is Innovation, the art and science of thinking about value differently. In this session, we will look at innovation through the lens of novel value creation using the historic Aldrich performance excellence journey as a yardstick of progress. We then look to the role the UN is playing in further driving innovation breadth and depth through 2013 and beyond. The learning objectives are cultural enablers that drive heightened levels of innovation and strategic risk-taking, tools, tips, and techniques used to quantify and prioritize innovation investment opportunities, harnessing knowledge and focused innovation, information sharing to drive further innovation, measuring and institutionalizing value realization through innovation across the ecosystem. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. In addition, there will be 10-minute time after the presentation for questions and answers. You can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. Tonight, our speaker is Dr. Rhonda Farrell. Dr. Rhonda Farrell is the CEO of Global Innovation Strategies, a consulting field services entrepreneurs and startups, nonprofits, and community groups, as well as the founder of Cyber and STEM Global Innovation Alliance. Her background is diverse and inclusive of innovation, change management, quality management, and cybersecurity as applied to organizations, initiatives, and technical infrastructures. In her additional roles, she serves as a federal government contractor serving into these same core cross-cutting functional areas. Rhonda thrives in innovative, entrepreneurial environments, driving value realization through heightened strategic alignment, the judicious application of innovation principles, and a strong eye towards the epiphanies associated with well-designed and fielded performance management programs. Dr. Farrell's recent professional background includes more than 10 years of contributions with Booz Allen Hamilton and prior engineering operations and cybersecurity services within Fortune 500 firms across Silicon Valley. Rhonda has a DSc in Information Assurance from the University of Fairfax, a GD in Technology from Concord Law School, and an MBA in Strategic Management from CSU Hayward, PA. It's our pleasure and it's our pleasure to have Rhonda as our speaker today. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for accepting to be our speaker tonight. Please take it away.
Ron, thank you so much. You're always a wonderful, wonderful webinar leader, chair, host, and MC. So we're so grateful for your service and your leadership to ASQ Innovation TC. Welcome, esteemed guests and members of our ASQ Innovation TC. Tonight we're going to discuss the topic of innovation, and we're really going to talk about all of the different facets of what value looks like to you, your organization, the community that you might serve. But before we begin, I'd just like to take a brief bit of time and introduce you to our wonderful ASQ Innovation Technical Community. We had a chance at World Conference, ASQ World Conference 2021, to talk to you all in our virtual booth. But tonight, I'd like to share with you all that didn't have a chance to be with us a little bit about our organization and what we're doing within our membership as well as the community writ large. So our tagline is innovation is the quality for tomorrow. And just like quality is everybody's job and security is everybody's job, we feel the same way about innovation, that it takes each and every one of you in your organizations, in your communities, in your homes, both you as a leader and you as a practitioner, to not only put this into action, but to develop and design the future of innovation and what that might look like in 2030 and beyond. our North Star for our technical community is that innovation is the process of creating value by applying novel solutions to meaningful problems. I know that you as quality practitioners and cybersecurity practitioners and practitioners across many other industries can relate, and hopefully that will resonate with you, because we as consultants, we as executives, we as entrepreneurs are really, the benefit that we bring is the problems that we can solve and the scale and the exponential value that we can bring to our organizations. Innovation has that same place within the ecosystem. If you're wondering a little bit about where we focus on, we really deal at the nexus between innovation management, quality, and lean enterprise. We think of innovation not only with regard to technology, but we categorize it in our body of knowledge as being part of culture, leadership, metrics, organizational structure, process, embedded in our strategy, and then enabled and supported by our tools and techniques. If we look at this through the lens of innovation management from an ISO standardization perspective, you'll find out on our Innovation TC YouTube library a phenomenal discussion by our founding leader, Mr. Peter Merrill, who talked about the Great Eight, the innovation management principles. And we'll talk about that and embed those within our discussion with you all tonight, because they truly are the fabric of innovation and the levers that you as practitioners and executives can pull over time. Those would be inclusive of a future focus leader, really the knowledge that strategy and mission and innovation are all aligned. The fact that in the ubiquitous data world that we live in, the value we can bring is through exploiting the insights that that data will show us and the world. It also speaks to managing uncertainty and risk through the lens of strategic investments in innovation over multiple parts of the organization. And then we support that through the principles of adaptability, as well as that holistic design thinking / systems approach. So that's our innovation division / technical community in a nutshell. I'm Dr. Rhonda Farrell, your facilitator for tonight. And without further ado, we will get on with our session. I won't read the slide before you, but I'll share just a little bit about myself and my desire for us to really be able to communicate and collaborate tonight. It's my desire that this is an interactive session where we're learning about your all's backgrounds just as much as you're learning about innovation through the lens of the technical community. I'd love you to share your innovation-oriented views, and we'd love to hear about your varied background. I know some of you who are attending have spent time in manufacturing, in integration, in technology, in cybersecurity, in many different roles across organizations, both as a SME, as a very well-versed, broad practitioner, and now into your executive roles across many different areas. And I am highly resonating and emulating your background. My background started out in manufacturing, both mainframes and storage subsystems. I worked with multiple organizations who are focusing on integration, quasi-state governments, a plethora of commercial firms, and now I've been supporting into federal government contracting, which are focusing on large-scale infrastructure and technology initiatives, oftentimes within the cyber realm. The common denominator upon which all of my background rests is quality, cybersecurity, change management, and innovation. Innovation has played a huge part across all of these industry segments and will continue to do so far into our future. So before we move into a deep dive of our topic tonight, I'd really like to hear from each of you. What does innovation value mean to you, and what might be some questions you had entering into our session tonight? So if you can type into the Q&A or type into the chat your responses, Dawn can then read that to me so that I get a better understanding of your background and where you might like this session to head going forward tonight. Dawn, would you like to read our responses?
So we had one answer so far: improve processes, products, and services to stand out from the competition.
And that's fantastic. Yeah, so I think what I hear this person saying is that innovation is really a differentiator, not only internal to your organization, but within the broader competitive landscape or ecosystem that your organization operates within. And you are exactly right? The value of innovation is that, much like quality, much like cybersecurity, much like some other programmatic or service feature or functionality, you want it to be a differentiator. You want it to drive value internally as well as externally using that holistic view. So I'd like to ask the attendees another question. And I'm wondering if you have ever had the question posed to you before: what does innovation mean to you? For some of our students and some of our next-gen leaders, they are coming from a different service and or product background, and they may never have had the chance to look at innovation as a cross-cutter or an enabler across multiple industries, and to look at what's common and what's unique in the various industry segments. So I'm wondering if you as practitioners have ever had the question asked: what does innovation mean to you? And how would you explain innovation or the value of innovation to your board, to one of your executives, to your senior leaders, to your workforce, or to your partners? Have you ever had this conversation? And if so, what was one of the most important, perhaps, takeaways that you gleaned from that?
I have one answer in here.
Please, Dawn, if you can read our responses.
Innovation is a must in the time of Quality 4.0. It was so well explained in Redefining Quality Foundations for Quality 4 and Beyond by Javid Chima today.
Thank you. And so I'm wondering if the person who mentioned this, yes, innovation is very well ingrained within our Quality 4.0 fabric. And even more important is the part that it's playing as we move into Industry 5.0 and our social construct that we're putting in place. I'm wondering if the attendees on the line tonight have seen the wide spectrum of changes that are occurring in the Asia Pacific region right now, and basically the bootstrapping or startup of Industry 5.0 based on this notion of the social construct that humans and technology have. So instead of looking at innovation through the technological lens as it is going to supersede the human element, this Society 5.0 and Industry 5.0 and Quality 5.0 and Innovation 5.0 is really delving into the symbiotic relationship between humans and technology, and the fact that technology is an enabler. So if we look at technology to be able to take on the rudimentary and the very highly difficult tasks, what that does is it enables the humans within the organizations to then take their strategy and their resulting outcomes to the next higher level of operationalization and achievement. So this whole Society 5.0 and this new, I would probably say, a 25-year look at what's going to be Quality 5.0 and Innovation 5.0. It's going to be this integration, this higher integration between technology and humans. We're already seeing it in AR and VR. We're already seeing the inklings of this in our machine learning and artificial intelligence, and it's enabling. Basically, its learning capabilities and its ability to forecast and help us examine that strategic chessboard, if you will, on many different levels for our industries to be able to take competitive advantage from. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, and I love the comment that talks about the value of innovation in that we're constantly learning. Exactly, right? So if we look at the construct of innovation at its root, which we'll get to the components very in a future slide, we'll look at it from a holistic standpoint, in that innovation, every aspect of our lives, both at the personal level, the practitioner level, and the organizational level. And it's really up to us as innovation practitioners and innovation SMEs and innovation entrepreneurs and executives to be able to bring those learnings and those constructs and those taxonomies and those models to our peers, to our organizations, and to the community writ large. So that's what our executive advisors are doing now. What we see going on in industry right now is this whole maturation of innovation, both from a qualitative and a quantitative, especially with regard to being able to ascertain return on investment, return on engagement, etc. So we'll get to that a little bit later in the session, but thank you for sharing your ideas and what innovation and innovation value might mean to you. Dawn, do we have any additional comments come in?
Sure, yes, we do have a few more comments actually came in. So I'm just going to be starting from the very bottom to top. Well, it is also making processes and product services cheaper. Any new product, process, or initiative needs to be justified from a business perspective. Innovation is taking an idea to the market to satisfy an unmet need. And the process of translating an idea or invention into a good or service that creates value for which customers will pay.
And that's exactly right, right? So if we go back to that critical discussion with regard to what's an innovation description that we could harness and use, right? So one is we want to be able to put it into a nutshell so that someone new to the world of innovation can get it, right? And they can see what benefits and results it can bring to the table immediately. And so again, I'll share the North Star because we find that this is just a phenomenal descriptor that a lot of people can use across many different levels of the organization to show the value. So again, innovation is the process of creating value by applying novel solutions to meaningful problems. So we had a very interesting conversation. Some of you might look at this continuum of innovation. So on the left-hand side would be what we would discuss or call continuous improvement. And we have a lot of dialogue in our virtual booth at WCQI about what is that, why is it called innovation on one spectrum and improvement on the other, right? And we talked about what is in reality the bright white line that you cross, right? And what we talked about most, I think that resonated with the attendees in the booth most, was the scale and the scope, right? So if we look at innovation, what we're trying to do is really amplify the transformational result sets that we're operationalizing for, again, to drive the most ROI or ROE, or according to, insert your favorite innovation performance management KPI. We'll get to those metrics and a little bit about how you measure those and how you slice and dice those depending on what industry, and a couple that you might be able to harness cross-industry to give you an apples-to-apples comparison as much as is feasible, given what's typically a dearth of public knowledge around this innovation area. So again, I thank you for your engagement and your questions. We'll go on to the next slide now, and we'll talk about that journey of innovation through the lens of Baldrige. So I want to direct your attention to a 2015 article that was authored by Mr. Harry Hertz. He is called the Baldrige Cheermudgeon, and he entitled that article, The Baldrige Approach to Innovation. And in that article, he highlighted the Baldrige Performance Excellence Framework and the institutionalizing of innovation as managing for innovation. I think if you're to look at the Baldrige criteria that was recently published in 2021, for 2021 and 2022, you'll find that they have done a tremendously phenomenal job of integrating it entirely across each of the different factors that you see. So if we look at the Baldrige framework, the intent, and even in their upcoming, or even in their 2021 to 2022 framework in a nutshell, they have innovation mentioned front and center, as well as digital transformation, etc., and DEI, right? So if we look at innovation, it is in and of itself the embodiment of diversity, right? Diversity of thought, diversity of approach, diversity of diffusion, diversity of experimentation, right? And so I love that they continue to bring these different conceptual pieces together and hone them and infuse them throughout the entire framework. We see that in their new surveys and tools, they are constantly reinforcing this concept of innovation. They are embroiling it into their surveys. Are we making progress? Are we making progress as leaders? And they're talking about it through the lens of, are you a role model leader as well? So I'm wondering if anyone on the webinar tonight has had a chance to do either one of their initial surveys or their more in-depth organizational self-assessment. Innovation is front and center in these survey tools and a self-assessment tools. And I think if you are new to examining how you can institutionalize and infuse the principles of innovation across your organization, this is a perfect place to start. So we see that not only does innovation have, not only is innovation integrated into the framework criteria, as you see noted before you, it's also embodied within their core concepts and values. So innovation, if you can look at it, is being embedded in every single aspect of the framework. They have it within their result set, as well as the concept of driving value. Now, from the Baldrige perspective, they equate value to perceived worth relative to cost and possible alternatives. We might look at that from our typical risk language associated with quality and cyber as being a cost-benefit analysis, right? And as you'll see a little bit later on in the session, we'll also look at different ways that we can quantitatively and qualitatively measure the result sets of innovation. So is there anyone on the line before we move forward to our next part of this discussion that would like to share maybe one aha moment they had around innovation through the lens of the Baldrige framework, if you've had a chance to participate and look at it through that? Oh, good question. For Veronica's question, I'm going to have to say, I don't know. I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, Veronica. Good question, though. We'll go now to our next topic. And this is really, again, for you as practitioners, being able to harness this framework so that you can then integrate innovation into the very fabric of your organization. But before you can get there, you have to integrate it into your thought processes. You have to integrate it into your mindset. You have to integrate it into your cultural ecosystem so that when you interact with your peers, when you interact with your executives, when you interact with your ecosystems, when you're supporting your community groups and nonprofits, you're coming at everything through the lens of innovation, right? And that's what's most important, is much like we embody quality, or much like we embody cybersecurity in our thought processes and our action, we can take this construct of innovation and be able to meet people no matter where they are along that awareness, education, and actualization continuum for innovation. So I'll invite you to, if you've not had a chance to partake of the newly published Baldrige Excellence Framework, where innovation is heavily focused and featured. I'll invite you to the 2021-2022 framework and some of the self-assessments that could help you look at innovation through a different light. We'll go now looking at basically what are the different pieces where we as practitioners need to be thinking about the greatest value realization, right? And so for us as innovation practitioners, we need to be able to understand that, again, innovation is just as much about what we're trying to seed thought-wise and mindset-wise and culture shift-wise as it is about the technology, tools, and techniques that we're bringing to the table. I'm wondering if someone who is a practitioner of innovation or who is an advocate or a champion or an evangelist out there in the community or within your organization, if there's one approach using either a people, process, or a technology lever that you've really been able to hit it out of the park with when it comes to innovation and socializing it or trying to embed it within the culture of your organization. Is there someone that would be willing to share their experience within the chat or the Q&A? I see Veronica. Dawn, would you like to read our?
Sure, yeah, there is one from Veronica Kaizen-Boyford. And yes, that's the only answer.
And so, yes, so I love Veronica. Veronica was speaking with us at World Conference, and she talked about the construct of Kaizen and basically how you can triage on a certain challenge that your organization is facing to be able to look at it from a multi-factional perspective from different stakeholders' perspectives and viewpoints so that you can create design of experiments, so that you can create pilots, so that you can understand through these different short sprints of innovative, either people-laden experiments or process value chain mapping related type of activities, or through these technological infusions or partnerships that you may be engaging with on a pilot or an experimentation standpoint, how you can move the needle forward according to your strategic goals, objectives, and overall mission plans. So thank you, Veronica. Dawn, do we have any additional comments within this area?
Yes, we do have another answer just came in. So in my company, there is competition that awards best projects for new products, materials, and design.
Oh, see, this is phenomenal. So thank you. Yes, and so I think what you're identifying is what we call, right, is the Shark Tank ubiquitous thinking, right? We're seeing that not only in the commercial space, but we're seeing it in our FFRDCs, we're seeing it in our federal government world, we're seeing it in the acquisition world, we're seeing it in our partnership world, we're seeing it in our services world, right? So if we look at how can we most effectively germinate an idea, a concept, right? Get it into minimal viable product posture or stance. How can we then put it through some preliminary gate, oftentimes what you were saying, through a competition or an award series? They use the term Shark Tank a lot in various federal government acquisition bake-offs, if you will. but it's again, how do we get the best innovative ideas, technologies, techniques? And again, there's a very fine line between improvement and innovation, and oftentimes that's just the scale of the transformation that you're seeking to make. We were talking about this yesterday, right? Instead of going from 0 to 40, i.e. in a continuous improvement or an improvement, we want to go 0 to 80 or 0 to 100 and very fast. And oftentimes when we can scale that quickly, we need some type of transforming automation and technology and supporting processes and supporting workforce put in place around that. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your ideas around that area. And it is holistic, and that's the point of this slide, right? We can't have innovation isolated or siloed in just one of these areas and have that ultimately be able to be scalable and effective and help you really achieve the strategic goals in the long term. So we'll go now to our where is your greatest value question. I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about looking at your own situation within your organization or your enterprise. And oftentimes, an organization, when it comes to innovation, they will be hitting it out of the park and batting 1,000 in 1 or 2 places, and then they will be really struggling in some other places, i.e. Culture integration, mindset shifts, how to integrate that not only across the top executives and the board, who typically get that from the exponential financial gains that are possible, and the practitioner and SME level, who are oftentimes the piloters and the designers of the experimentation and the harnessing of the collection engines and the analysis engines, if you will. So we have this middle batch of those people, so I'll call them controllers, right? Because if we look at innovation, we want to take very informed risks, right? Innovation is about taking risks, but taking risks in an informed manner that will have payoff in the, maybe not in the short term, but definitely in the mid to long term. And it's what we would call, right, doubling down on a few strong bets that your organization is going to make in the mid and long term. Oftentimes, that's done through under the auspices of a risk portfolio, right? So we're going to apply innovation to services, we're going to apply innovation to products, we're going to apply innovation internally, we're going to apply innovation culturally to get people up to speed mindset and practices wise to now be able to not only incubate but to actualize on innovation as a concept and innovation as a practice, right? So I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback with regard to, first question is, if you had to pick anywhere across the spectrum where you would expend, let's just say it's the first domino in the innovation life cycle, where would you spend your first dollar with regard to your innovation financing to make sure that your organization had built a solid runway to be able to see, even conceptually, the benefits of what innovation can bring to them? So I'd love to hear your thoughts and your approach on this. Dawn, would you like to read our responses?
Sure. One comment on that is training and leaders. And there was another comment about, I guess, previous questions, Rhonda. Managers are normally risk averse.
So let's talk about that, right? So yes, so they kind of go, thank you, Don, they kind of go hand in hand, right? So if we think about some of our old enterprise constructs, we're about the concept as managers control, and leaders basically are the ones that have this open, less rigid agenda to be able to drive things forward. So if we have to somehow balance the organization where we know we have to control, but we don't necessarily have to control at the person level, right? We can then put in place exactly to this person's point about training the leaders, right? We can help train the leaders in innovation mindset and innovation practices and innovation tools so that we can allow the control to occur from a process automation standpoint versus a person. And oftentimes what we're talking about, this managerial risk adverseness, is about how does innovation incubate and bubble up through the various levels of an organization, especially if you're in a hierarchical environment. And I think that's why you probably heard mention the fact that they had to almost as both as a remediation step and a proactive way of how do we get ideas to the table that the organization can actualize from an innovation perspective in a cohesive way that doesn't have them get filtered out early on in the process. And I think that's what they're talking about from a managerial risk aversion, right? So oftentimes, if that concept or that idea is foreign to you and you don't necessarily understand the value and the benefits, and especially if you've not been trained in that field to stay open to the possibilities and to want to look parallelly at something or tangentially at something, you're going to miss the point that that other party is trying to bring to you as far as the value of that innovation, right? And so we want to, oftentimes, that's the value of these Shark Tanks, and that's the value of these basically these challenges, is to allow teams to conceptualize, move something into MVP form, and run it through some type of qualifying race, if you will, challenge to be able to get it to the table for funding from the executives, right? So sometimes it's just MVP enough to get it to do X, then you get, okay, you got it that far. We see that there's merit in this. We understand where you're trying to take this strategically. We understand how this is going to be a benefit to the organization, and now we will fund you. So it's almost like internal venture capital funding that occurs for these innovations over time, but it's through the lens of internal to the organizations, or as I think as a couple of people that's on the line tonight can attest to, with our National Science Foundation and other innovation partners, right? So I think we see from an acquisition standpoint this concept of experimentation, of piloting, where multiple stakeholders can conceptualize and pilot something together to bring it to MVP and to qualify it at a certain maturity level, and then they'll get further funding to be able to take it to the next level of technology robustness. So Don, do we have anything more come in before we move to the next?
Sure, Rhonda, yes, there is another comment. The first thing I am focusing on is VOC. In my industry, legal operations, there is a tendency to do as the legal technology vendors say, not as the lawyers and law firm clients say. So we wind up spending a bunch of money on off-the-shelf technology and say we are innovative just because the technology is new, but we haven't defined the business problem or opportunity that the tech is supposed to address.
And this is perfect, right? So this is exactly the core of innovation, right? Thank you for whom raised that, right? So what do we as quality professionals and innovation professionals and cybersecurity professionals, what do we always do? We hone and find the perfect problem to be the baseline, to be the springboard for the innovation that we want to bring, right? So we oftentimes, as designers, as developers, as integrators, as innovators, we fall into these innovations, and then it's up, right? The quality of that innovation is really the scale of the problem that it's going to solve. So if our brains don't work like that, right, we need to work with stakeholders, and we need to work with business executives, and we need to work with legal to be able to craft the perfect problem statement, right, for our external investors, for our stockholders, for our internal executives, and for those whom we want to disseminate that innovation to. I want to raise the comment about legal, right? So if we look at an industry as a whole where some extremely interesting innovations, technological innovations are occurring, it's occurring within the legal field, right? If we think about the digital transformation pivot that they had to make, and basically their collaboration and their communication and what they have to do from an evidentiary standpoint, and their integration across these multiple fields of study, right? The legal technology innovations is one of the most fascinating areas that we can probably draw parallels from and lift, what we call lift and shift, most easily. Dawn, before we move to the next topic, do we have any more comments?
Yes, Rhonda, actually this is more than a question than comment. I am trying to do this now with a business case. How do I show the management the cost benefits?
Oh, this is, I love whoever just raised that question. So that is a perfect segue into our next slide. So here we are. We are looking at innovation performance measurement system. And what we want to do here, so think about you as a quality professional, and now, or you as a cybersecurity professional, right? When we first looked at cybersecurity and we needed to articulate the value, we needed to measure the value that cybersecurity programs brought, what did we do? We went back to the field of study of quality and took our KPIs and morphed a few keywords into cybersecurity, and we used the divider to be the cybersecurity related defects that we found, right? That's how we were basically creating the ROI for a cybersecurity program when we first started out, right? Take the number of defects that you found, basically create this formulaic process where you examined the percentage that actually fell into the cyber bucket, how many you could remediate with one of your potential fixes, features, or functionalities or shifts, and then that's how you would quantify your ROI for cybersecurity, is through these very seminal KPIs that were basically built off the backbone of cyber. When we look at innovation and we look at the ROI or ROE, and there's multiple flavors of this, it's not all about just the financial impact, right? It's about how can we agnostically take and measure the ROI of innovation across public entities to understand how we're doing in comparison with another organization. So I'll introduce to you all tonight the system. And when I say the innovation performance measurement system, we're going to talk about, what are the factors that we have to be thinking about when we're designing our KPIs and our metrics. So when we are sharing with our executives and with our board and with our leaders across an organization or externally to our stockholders, and we're trying to basically create demand from the outside in for more innovation technologies or maturity of innovation practices, we're going to have to understand how we can best communicate the value of innovation, right? So that has to be interwoven into our innovation measurement strategy, right? We also have to understand from the KPIs and the metrics and the measurements, what is going to best enable us to show the most robust strategic alignment. Remember when we were talking before, is innovation is an enabler for our strategy. It's not an ends in and of itself. It's a lever that we pull. It's an enabler that we utilize to enable our organizations and our enterprises to scale to the result sets from a financial standpoint and a products and services standpoint that the executives and the workforce and the partners know is feasible, right? And oftentimes it's showing that exponential value over time. And that's a phased approach that takes maturing. It takes maturing conceptually within the organization, which is what we're talking about tonight, right? What are the conceptual pieces that we need to socialize within the enterprise to help them understand how we best communicate the value of innovation so that we can put those pieces together in some very highly digitalized dashboard way so that executives and partners and stakeholders, et cetera, can instantly see the ROI or ROE of the innovations. And that will take, again, that communication strategy, that will take that close alignment between innovation and strategy. That will help you, right? So we don't want to use again, innovation as an end of itself, right? We want to use it as a decisioning for resource allocation. So if we have a portfolio of products and services, we want to have KPIs, metrics, and measurements that enable us to see where are we getting the highest return on investment for transforming or innovating in this particular area. And so that will be where we will continue to fund, and that's where we will continue to allocate people and process resources, because we understand that's where we're able to achieve not only incremental but exponential results. We also have to look at what you would call velocity, right? So innovation as a velocity enabler, we have to be able to look across different innovation initiatives that we have, products and services, internal and external, to understand which one of these is making sufficient progress and which one of them needs remediation and or corrective action. So when we're designing, our ecosystem, we're designing our innovation performance measurement system, we have to take that progression and corrective remediation active into consideration. And then last but not least, we have to understand that innovation, this measurement system is in and of itself maturing at the same rate as our organizations can consume, handle, and integrate innovation, right? So this too is a burgeoning body of knowledge. It too is maturing. It too is going to be something that you're going to have to keep your eye on the ball with regard to the changes, both processes, KPIs, metrics, and measurements. So it's not just a simple answer to say you can always use 1, 2, or 3 metrics or measurements. I think the body of knowledge right now, what they are looking at is they're looking at, I believe, 2 to 3 metrics that if you want to ascertain the amount of margin that you can generate off of the new products and services that were built from the auspices of an innovation portfolio or program. That's really the formulaic perspective or view that they're trying to use that would allow R&D organizations to compare apples to apples. One that's highly dependent on the monetary amounts being published in some public forum, either in their annual reports or through their SEC filings. You can find that, right? And that's kind of where the perspective is going. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't help you if you're a private company and you want to be taking into consideration their particular result sets to understand how you compare. So really what they're advocating for in this innovation performance measurement system creation within an organization is that you take these 5 factors into consideration. One is how mature is your innovation culture at currently? 2, there is probably upwards of 100 to 150 innovation metrics that you can potentially pull from. I think the current state of perspective right now is to look, especially if you're an R&D, yes, look at these agnostic KPIs that you can plug in, because that's probably going to keep your venture capitalists, your investors happy, because you're going to be able to compare across and within R&D companies or R&D portfolios. But for those who maybe do not have that level of robustness of their processes or automation to be able to readily capture that, I believe that the body of knowledge and perspective is pick a few, right? Please do not try to implement all of the metrics that are out there at first. I believe they want to say you probably want to have between high level 3 to 5 at most as you're first starting out. Work and learn how to measure them on an ongoing basis in an automated fashion so that you can report out on those consistently, and then basically on a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis, compare them to the body of knowledge that's occurring in this maturity area so that you can understand what new knowledge has come to light so that you can then strategically insert that into your performance measurement system. The next thing is the concept of benchmarks, right? So for those new to this area, and the idea of benchmarks, it really allows you to do an apples to apples comparison. If I try innovation technique X and the next company over tries innovation technique X, what is our result set if we try to implement that consistently? And a benchmark is going to help you understand how you compare against each other. From a communication standpoint, again, you want to look at the who you're going to be communicating these KPIs out to. You're going to compare. You want to look at how often you're going to need to communicate these out, and then you're going to want to understand from a tools, technologies, and techniques, how you can, again, reach the right level of robustness that you need to be able to consistently collect, measure, analyze, and report. So thank you for the person who directed our question there. Because we are almost at the end of our session tonight, I'm going to go briefly into this last quote, because I think this really embodies what innovation is really about. And I will, because via a lack of time, I will leave you with this last quote, and then I will like to ask Dawn. Dawn, do we have time to open it up to say one or two last questions from our audiences tonight?
Sure, yes, we do have time for questions. Of course, Rhonda.
Did we have anything that came in earlier that someone wants to speak to?
So there were some questions that I'm going to just save them for perhaps the question time that we have. But then one comment was, a general measure of an innovation program is the NPV of project portfolios and pipeline.
Yes, exactly. So thank you. So whoever wrote that, right? So basically that speaks to the design of the metrics program itself, right? So if you look at net present value, it's really, you need to be able to measure that consistently across your programs within your portfolios, and then you need to be able to roll that up consistently up into a total innovation view for your executives and your investors and typically your stockholders, right? And your stakeholders internally, right? So this is where that you can get that to be a very granular view at the program project level, but then again, you want to roll it up consistently into one single view into a dashboard so that you could do drill downs, right? So that's really where it allows us to understand this, that where innovation velocity is occurring across different parts of an organization, right? It might be the case where an organization may be risk adverse in part of their enterprise, and right, so what do? They spin off a portion of their organization to focus on some of these transformational initiatives. They may ask them to bring, maybe 1 to 3 products and or services to market, and then they'll be able to examine this NPV across this portfolio and compare it according to their more mature projects and services, and they can understand, they can look historically at the roadmap that they were able to achieve process and organizationally, culturally, process and infrastructure wise with what we'll call the legacy methods and the new innovation methods, and they'll be able to ascertain better from an investment and a resource allocation perspective without risking this whole other part of their enterprise. So I hope that at least speaks to that comment. Dawn, do we have other questions?
Sorry, I was muted. So there is one question, I believe. It's also like to know how the ID is creating innovation and measuring it. I believe that was about the innovation velocity.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Okay. That's a good question. I think probably what they're looking at there. So if we want to look at innovation velocity, you want to be able to understand the metric is going to have to be about how fast can your, either your new processes, your new infrastructure, your automation, or your integrated program is able to take something from concept into fielding and ultimately into revenue generation, right? So how fast can you get something concept to MVP, piloted, experimented, fielded, and then into the point where it's generating margins and revenues in excess of expenses, and then again a comparison against your legacy methodologies, products and or services. To the best of my knowledge, that's what they're looking at there. Do we have more?
Yes, there is another question. What are some examples of metrics the innovation division uses?
This is a very good question, and it's actually, this is an area that we are currently looking at, because right now the innovation technical community is finalizing, or at the very last portions of the build out of their innovation body of knowledge, through institutionalizing or interweaving the innovation management principles. So once I was telling you up front, where Peter Merrill, who works on the ISO 56000 innovation management standards, has been incubating and integrating and maturing these principles over time. He is working with our executive advisor team and our innovation body of knowledge team to basically institutionalize those principles within our body of knowledge, and then bolstering that will be a resource that helps us look at this innovation performance measurement functionality, right? So we want to wait until we field the innovation body of knowledge so that we can then put in place that bolstering resource around performance measurement for our members and for the community. But I want to invite people that this is, again, a nascent burgeoning area of study. There's quite a lot of quantitative research going on here, as well as some qualitative research. So I invite you to look at some of our industry partners in the innovation space globally, who have probably already published a resource that may be readily available for you all to harness and use. Dawn, do we have anything else before we close for this evening?
Thank you, Rhonda. Yes, we do have a few more questions actually coming in.
Okay.
So the next question is, how can you be a quality practitioner without innovating? We strike out in search of new ways to improve quality every day.
Right, and so I think you bring to light, right, this tension, if you will. It's really, again, if we think of quality from a total quality management perspective, what we were typically attempting to do is gain access or harness frameworks and methodologies that allowed us to incrementally improve. The construct of innovation really is just along that same continuum. If you look at the left-hand side, it's going to say improvement. If you look at the right-hand side, it's going to say innovation. And the only difference is the scale of the improvements that you're making, right? So if we look at improvement, we're moving from 0 to 40. It's going to be incremental. The pace may be slightly slower than we would in a transformational, exponential value derivation way, right? It doesn't mean that there's not a place for both. We don't take the innovation out of improvement, right? We couldn't do ideation without innovation tools, right? We couldn't do process improvement at scale without innovation practices. We couldn't do the layered approach to improvement to ultimately have that be additive enough to reach the innovation exponential scale, right? So it's a spectrum, and they really go hand in hand. You as a quality professional are constantly using what would be considered to be an innovation-related tool for your improvement as well as your transformational types of activities. I would invite you to go to asq.org. On their resources page, you'll find quality tools and innovation tools within that toolkit. It's a very large toolkit, and it's basically, you just have to look at the tag. Do they tag it with quality and or do they tag it also with innovation? And it's mostly about the scale that you can actualize through the use of that tool. Do we have any more, Dawn?
Yes, thank you, Rhonda. The next question is, if we know volume and velocity, can we then define intensity?
I think I missed the very last part of that, Dawn.
So the question is, if we know the innovation volume and velocity, can we then define intensity?
Ooh, very good question. I would need more information on that to understand kind of that quantitative formula. I'm sorry, I'm not quite spun up on that one yet. So I'll either have to ask for more information or I'll have to look it up and get back to that person.
So maybe we can move on to the next question. Wouldn't you say the improvement is inwardly directed while innovation is outwardly directed, new customers and new products and services?
Very good question, right? So I from the perspective of being a consultant in Fortune 500 organizations and in state government and in federal government entities, I'm going to say I think there's a place for innovation with both internally as well as externally. Organizations in and of themselves as an ecosystem cannot serve their external customers and clients and partners and stakeholders without internally having to innovate first. So I don't think it's just possible to incrementally improve to be able to reach the scale with which they'll need to innovate to best serve their second and third order effect stakeholders and partners. So I think it's a maturing process that organizations have to go through internally to be able to then provide those services externally.
Thank you, Rhonda. I think there isn't any more questions. So, well, thank you very much.
Well, I just want to say, Dawn, thank you for being our wonderful MC tonight. Again, I just want to recognize Dawn's service to our ASQ Innovation Technical Community as our webinar chair and our leader. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. We thank you for your time, your attention, your contributions. We hope that you're able to get value out of this tonight. I'm happy to supply resources for you if you want to reach to me. I'll supply the deck so that you could see our last slide, and I will be happy to share again our innovation technical community's ways that we can collaborate with you going forward and supply any resources. You can reach to me at ceo@gblinnovstrat.llc.com, or you can visit us at just Google My ASQ space Innovation TC. We'd love to continue the conversation. We'd love you to have become involved, to collaborate on this whole innovation ecosystem going forward. There's a plethora of interesting, informative innovation sessions in our YouTube channel library that we invite you to listen to and learn from. And again, we so appreciate your attendance here and look forward to the next conversation that we get to have with you in our innovation ecosystem. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you, Dawn.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for being our valued speaker tonight. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening all.
Thank you.